Okay, so next thing we're going to solder on, let's do the LEDs. So the first one you're going to find is this red LED. So this is a light emitting diode, and it's polarized. What this means is there's a correct way to put it in and an incorrect way to put it in. The correct way will make it work, the incorrect way will make it not work. It won't explode, it just won't work. So if you look, the way we can tell which one's which is there's a longer lead and a shorter lead. The longer lead indicates the positive, also known as the anode. That shorter lead indicates the negative, or the cathode. So I've nicely put down shorter lead here, and that's the square one. So short goes in the square. And you'll notice there's one that says low battery next to D1. And I'm going to put it in here, like so. Now this one's not going to go in all the way. As you can see, there's these little things right here. This is going in that way. I'm going to bend it out like so. And then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to solder. Next, we're going to do the RGB LED. And that one is this little clear one. It might be a different size, but it should be clear like this. And of course, longer lead is positive, shorter lead is negative. So I'm going to put it where it says D2. So D2 is going to, so I'm going to stick it right here, shorter lead. This one will go all the way through more than likely. So then we'll come in, we'll clip the leads. Side. Alright. So it should look something like this at this point. So, at this point you've gotten a lot of it already done. So, next thing we're going to want to solder on is and this one's going to be a little bit more of a challenge, is we're going to add on our accelerometer. So what this little thingy does is when it bumps into something, it will send a little pulse to a chip right here, which will light this LED up to make it look cool. This can do a lot more than that. It can actually, you can use this to get information as to like position and stuff, and all sorts of other cool things. So you can kind of rip open this bag and then dump it out. You'll have two of these little pin-looking thingies. These are called pin headers. So you're going to want the one that's straight. One like this, to discard it. You don't need it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to solder this one together. So stick it through the hole like that, and then we're going to put it to the side. We're going to lay it down like that against the table. This one's going to require a little bit of precision, and it might be pre-soldered for you on your board. So I'm going to add a little bit of solder. Now, if you want to make it perfectly straight, though this is completely optional, take your thing, place it flat like this, then reheat it, and then it'll sit flat. See? So that's closer. It's not quite there yet. So the trick is you got to make sure you're not touching the pin, otherwise you'll burn yourself. See, now I've kind of made it straight, though it's not really that important. So then I'll come in and I'll heat up the rest of these. So now it should look something like that. See? Wouldn't advise touching it. It's going to be a little bit warm. Take this little bag and discard it. You don't need it anymore. So then what you're going to do is you're going to bring over your board. And if you notice, there's a spot right here that says U5. You stick it on like this. Not like I've seen people put it in like this. It shouldn't look like this. It should look like this. Now there's a little bit of a stagger on this to make it fit in place. So then it probably might want to fall out. So what you can do is you can grab little trick you can do is while holding this down, take your needle nose pliers and grab these pins and bend them out like this, like so, and then it'll hold it in place. And then what you can do is, I like to turn it 90 degrees. Alright, once you do that, look at it, inspect it, make sure it looks all pretty. It should look pretty. And now your board should look like that. Alright, next thing we're going to do is we're going to solder on the switch. So the switch looks like this. It goes right here. There is no correct orientation for this. It's basically going to go in like that. So you're going to hold it down. And while holding it down, flip it over, and remember we're going to do the same technique that we used for these things. So come over here, and it might require a little bit of force, but use the back of your fingernail. You can bend them out like that. Just bend out two of the opposing corners. So then you can hold it flat like that. So then immediately come over, and also it's a good idea, what I'm doing is I'm taking my fingers and I'm carefully pressing down the board so that it's flat. And then we're going to add a little bit of solder. You don't need very much solder. I tried to make these pads bigger, but this is about as big as I could make them without them shorting each other out. And then when you're done, your board should look like this. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to install this module here. This is the battery charging module. So if you remember, I asked you guys to save your little trimmings and stuff. These little things. So now you get to see why you need them. So this, you might need a partner to do. If you technically don't, but if you're having trouble, if it's not wanting to behave, you might want to do it. So what you do is, to solder this together, you're going to do is take your lead and you're going to drop it into here like so. It doesn't have to be straight. It can be kind of crooked like this because these pins can bend. And then I'm going to carefully place I'm not going to touch the pad actually just yet. I'm going to bring it near to the pad. And I'm going to float it in place, and eventually when I add enough solder, it'll catch it. Like that. Yeah, so if you need a partner to do this, just have them use the needle nose pliers and just have them hold on to it while you're doing this. So now we're going to put this on here. So if you notice, you got this thing, how it says USB plug here. This is a USB plug. It's a micro USB plug. In case you didn't know. So this might require a little bit of playing around, but there is basically a bunch of pins on these. You're gonna want to get all 6 of these to fit through. So you can bend these pins around. Eventually they'll decide to work with you, but it might not go perfectly flat. Sometimes you're lucky and it will, sometimes you won't be so lucky. It's just got to be mostly flat. And take your leads and bend them out like this. As you can see, it's kind of flat like that. You just need it mostly flat. And then we're going to come in with our iron and we are just going to fill in these paths. So next thing you're going to solder on is the pin headers for the Arduino. They look something like this. They might not have these little ridges. These are called pin headers. And they're basically the socket, they're a socket for your Arduino. So the issue is these things can rack it, can kind of move back and forth. So to keep them stable, we're going to pull out our Arduino and use it as kind of like a jig to hold it together. So the Arduino specifically we're using is a BLE Nano. It's a Arduino Nano with a Bluetooth module on it. Looks like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these pin headers and I'm going to stick them on like that. Like that. So then what I'll do is I'll stick it on, and technically it doesn't matter if it's on correctly or not, if you orient it correctly or not at this point, because you can orient it correctly later. So stick them through the holes like this, where it says Arduino Nano plus BLE, and it'll either press fit in place and feel like nice and tight. If it doesn't, flip it over and just press down like this, and then we're going to solder it in place. Alright. As you can see, these pin headers are soldered in. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this out. So be careful that you don't bend, that you don't damage the pins. You're going to kind of pull it out straight. You do this and then put this off to the side. You don't need it. So now we're going to get on to probably the hardest thing to solder on this thing, which is the battery clips. And those Keystone 54s, they look like this. And the reason why they're hard to solder is because of the fact that they are giant chunks of metal, and there's no way of really securing them properly. So actually one of the middle school teachers came up with this method. It actually is pretty nifty. So basically what I want to do is get these sort of in place like so. And then what you're going to want to do is grab them like this and flip it over. And I'm trying to make sure that as I do this that they stay in place, because they might move. And then while holding it down, I'm going to grab my flush cuts. I'm going to slide them underneath like this. And that'll keep the board flat. So that, like I said, this is going to require a lot more heat to do and a lot more solder, just because of the fact that you're dealing with a larger piece of metal. So what I'm going to do is I'm pressing down on the board just to make sure it stays flat. And I'm definitely making sure. You can see how much solder it requires. I'm also letting it sit there for a little bit, and that way the heat can get sucked into that, and that'll make sure it's flat. So immediately come over and only do one of those pins, because you want to make sure all this is tacked into place, so that you can deal with the other pins later. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to heat up this. This one is connected to ground, so it's going to require a lot more heat, even more than before, and you can see how it's kind of stuck at this point. As you can see, as it sits around like this, it's kind of like moving around. And then what you're going to want to do is make sure it's all flat. So you can see how this one's kind of crooked a little bit. So I can come in like this, hold it a little bit flat and then move it. And now it's perfectly flat. So now that you've got those all in place, then you can solder the remaining 4 pins.